Today we're going to learn how to make this title. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop in and learn how to build that right now. So the first thing we're going to do is head over to pexels.com. Sorry about that. Pexels.com. That is where we will find free video downloads. And so if we come over to Pexels, that's PEXELS.com, we can type in landscape, and we'll go to landscapes, and then we'll click over to videos. So we'll find a shot, something that is wide and not vertical. You don't need to use 4K footage for this. In fact, if you do, I would even recommend shrinking it down a little bit. And once you find a clip you like, you can go ahead and select it and download it. And so let's go ahead and pick a clip, something like, I don't know, let's check this one out here. Okay, so that's a good looking clip, and if you decide you want to use that, you can click free download and that will download it right to your computer. I have already downloaded this clip right here. So we'll go ahead and work with this one. And so now we can head on over to After Effects and open up a new comp. So I'm going to head over to After Effects, and I want to show you a couple of things, some organizational tools that I recommend doing. So I'm going to create a new project for this. And when I create a new project, the first thing I do is go File, Save As. And the reason I do this is because it's going to save a auto save folder into whatever folder I save my project into. So I really want to make sure that I know where that is in case it crashes halfway through making my project. So I'm going to call this Tut version 3. And at that point, what I also like to do is then go over to my downloads folder and grab the clip and drag it into that same folder. You want all of your assets coming from the same place, and so I can drop that in there. You can see it's already in there, but that's an easy way to copy your file so that all your assets are coming from the same place. Now we'll go ahead and import that video clip into Premiere. I'm going to right click in this window right here, the project window, and choose Import File. If I pick this file right here, that's my video clip. So I'll go ahead and click Open. Now, notice how it automatically created a comp. I really don't want it to do that, and I'll show you why. I'm going to go ahead and grab this comp up here and just drag it to the trash. The reason I don't want it to create a comp just yet is because if I double click on this video clip, you'll see that it's over a minute long, and I don't need a minute's worth of footage. So instead of creating the comp and then trimming this down, I'm going to trim it down before I create the comp. So right now you'll notice I just have the video clip and no comp, no timeline. So I'll go ahead and put the playhead wherever I want this to begin. I'm going to set mine at about 8 seconds. Now, in order to make that the endpoint, I just need to click this little bracket right here that says Set Endpoint. And notice that it trims off everything to the left of that point. Now I'm going to jump forward to 18 seconds, and I'll use this button to create the out point. And that way I now have 10 seconds of this video selected. And so by doing that, I can now drag it into the new comp icon right here, and it'll create a comp that is 10 seconds long and matches the cut down video. And it's also a good idea to go up and take a look at your composition settings in the composition drop down right there, comp settings. In this case, my video clip is 1280 by 720. That's fine. But the frame rate is 60 frames a second, and I definitely don't want to be working at 60 frames a second. So I'm going to go ahead and click this little drop down right here and change this to 23.976, and then click OK. And that basically removes all those extra frames and will make it play back at the cinematic frame rate of 24 frames a second. Okay, so now that we have our video clip in, the next step is going to be to add some text to our scene. So I'm going to grab the text tool and click off, then grab the text tool and come down here and type in the words cooked from the heat. All right, seems like a good title to a movie that takes place in the desert. And then I'll go ahead and double click on that text to select it. I can go over to my align panel and I'll align it to the center of my screen. I'll probably move it a little bit, but for now that's fine. And then I'll go ahead and scale it up in the character window, and I'll come over to the letting control, and the tracking control. We'll stretch it out just a little bit. And then we'll go ahead and hit Command D to duplicate it. And with the duplicate selected, I'm just going to use the Shift and the arrow keys and hold down Shift and drop the duplicate down here. Now for the duplicate, I'll double click on it and I'll change it to say a Taylor Films production. Okay, now again, make sure that you have your all caps selected for these. And I'll go ahead and kind of close that tracking back down for that layer. Make sure it's selected before you make any changes. Kind of bring it back in a little bit. And after all these years, you'd think I'd be able to spell my name right, but occasionally I misplace a letter. All right, so, and then I'm going to go ahead and again select it and shrink it down pretty small, like right about there. And then I'll use the arrow keys and the Shift button. Actually, I'll hit the V key to select my selection tool. Then I'll use the arrow keys with that text selected and nudge it up. I think I'm going to put it right about there, and then I'm going to put the title right up about there. We'll see how it looks when it all comes together. I might still adjust some of that. Okay, now I'm going to do a couple things just to modify this a little bit. Let's go ahead and select the bottom text, and let's drop its opacity by hitting the T key down to 50%. So we'll allow for a little bit of pass-through of the colors behind on that text. And then I'll select the main text and hit the T key, and I'll drop that down to about 75% opacity. Okay, and now that we've got our text looking kind of how we want it, let's go ahead and make sure that we are on the switches workspace. And right now we're in the modes workspace. So we need to come down and click this bottom button here and choose switches. And then we can set both of these layers to being 3D. Now, we want both of the text layers to be 3D, but we don't want the background layer to be 3D. Okay, so now that we've done that, in order to create our movement on this animation, we're not going to keyframe the text itself. We're going to keyframe a camera. And along with that, the camera is going to give us that shallow depth of field effect that we saw earlier where it was kind of blurred out. So let's go ahead and add a camera, but I don't want to add it at the very beginning. Well, it doesn't matter where we add it. So let's go ahead and click Layer, New, Camera. And what we'll see here is the camera settings window. We want to make sure we're set to a 2-node camera. There's actually two options here, the 1-node and the 2-node. The 1-node doesn't have a point of interest, whereas the 2-node does. And for that reason, it's easier to work with the 2-node camera. Along with that, we'll set the preset to 35mm. We'll go down and enable depth of field. And we'll change our aperture value from 6.25 up to 100. And what that's going to do is it's going to give us a really shallow depth of field, which means that when the footage is out of focus, it'll get nice and soft, and then we'll animate it to come into focus so that it's readable. You can see right now it's a little bit soft. So the way a camera works is, first thing you want to do is come over to the lower right hand side and switch it from one view to 2 views. Because at the moment we can't actually see the camera. But if we come over here and hit Command minus a few times, now we can see that if I select the camera, there it is right there. Along with that, you can see there's my camera. Now if I select my layers, you can see that they're right up here. And the reason they're a little bit soft on focus is because this line right here is the camera's focus distance. So right now we're just a little bit off. Notice I'm going to come over here, select the camera, and you can move the camera right from these controls right here. And all we're going to do for this animation is animate the Z-space value. That's the depth value. So you'll notice if I move this forward to right here, first off, our text is now nice and sharp. But on top of that, just dragging this, you can see there's some movement there. We're sort of animating our text without actually keyframing the text itself. So it's good to know that if for any reason your focus distance is somewhere else, that you can come over to the camera's drop down over here, and you can come over to camera options, and you'll see right here, focus distance. This allows me to move that line. So if I didn't want to move my camera, I could just change the focus distance right here and make sure that that was now even with my text layers. So if I drag it back here, you can see that everything is nice and sharp because I adjusted the focus distance. So it's totally up to you. You see if I move it way back, that everything starts to go out of focus. So this is a really important control right here, and you want it to be right where your layers are. Okay, so the fact is what we're animating here is we're animating position. We're going to basically take the camera and we're going to push it past our text. Now, I'm noticing that my text is kind of going up towards the top, and I don't really love that, so I might end up moving the text just a little bit. But either way, I'm going to push the camera past the text. Now, since this camera has a point of interest, sometimes when you push it past the text, it will automatically flip itself around to orient towards the text. If that happens, just simply right-click on the camera, go to Transform, go to Auto Orient, and if you click on that, you'll see that it says Orient towards the point of interest. And what that'll do sometimes is that'll make the camera flip around without you wanting it to. So just make sure to turn that off and click OK. All right, so at this point we have the camera pushed well past our text. So we can go ahead and start to animate this camera to pull back slowly and reveal our text coming in from behind. Just like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and with the camera in place, we'll come over to the camera and we'll hit P for position. And we're going to add a keyframe, but let's first move our playhead to where we want this to start. My video starts at about 8 seconds, so I'm going to jump to about, let's say 11. And I'll put my first keyframe there. So I've got my playhead essentially 3 seconds in, and I'll go ahead and click the stopwatch for position. And then I'll jump forward another 3 or 4 seconds. I don't want this to move too fast. I want it to take its time. So I'll jump from 11:07 to 14:07. And then I'm simply going to drag this control for the Z space backwards until my text lines up with the focal plane of the camera, which is currently right at the edge of its length right here. You can see there's my text. So right there we have created the animation. If I back it up and hit play, you can see it zooms in kind of quick, but if we watch it again, it should slow down just a little bit. There we go, it looks pretty good. Okay, now you'll notice right now we have linear keyframes, so let's go ahead and select both of those. Right click, we'll go to Keyframe Assistant and choose Easy Ease. Remember, if you're on a full-size keyboard, you can hit FN, F9, and that'll do the same thing. And that's just going to ease our movement in a little bit, which will look nice. Okay, now with the second line of text, I don't want that animating in with the top line. So what we'll do is we'll select that, and let's drag its start point back to just about the second keyframe. right about there. So we just have the text coming in, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use a preset to animate on the second line. So let's go over to Effects and Presets, and let's type in Foggy. And you'll see that there's an animation text preset called Foggy. Now you can use any preset for this you want. I'm just recommending this one, but you have complete liberties to use whatever font you want, whatever preset you want. So again, that's up to you. But I'm going to drag this down and drop it right on my second line there, and that's going to give it this nice little sort of foggy animation. And I can slow that down if I want to by just selecting it and hitting the U key, and then I could spread those keyframes out if I wanted that to happen a little slower, and I could ease them as well. Let's see if my F9 button works. My F9 button does not work because I don't have the modifier. Oh, I do have an FN button. All right, so let's go FN, F9. There we go. That just eased our keyframes, and we can go ahead and take a quick look at that. All right, that looks pretty nice. That's kind of the speed and the pace I was hoping for. And so now that we have all of those things taken care of, let's go ahead and add some motion blur as well. Well, actually nothing's moving here. So other than the camera, there's really nothing to add motion blur to. So we can skip over that for this project. We've eased our keyframes. All right, so essentially the animation is built. Now let's go ahead and add some additional effects to this just to try to make it look a little more cinematic. I'm going to go ahead, actually before I leave the camera, let me show you one more thing. This was the top view we were looking at right here, but if I come down to active camera, or top right here, and I set it to custom view, it's worth seeing how that works as well. So you can see now that if I move this over here, we're just seeing a sort of a sideways version of what's going on there. So that's a really helpful way to see what's going on. And you can also turn on the camera and use this view to do your animations. So let's go ahead now and just switch back to one view, and we'll go a little bigger here, and let's add in some things to make this just feel a little more cinematic. First thing I'm going to do is give it just a little bit of color correction using the Lumetri color suite. So I'm going to go up to Effects. I'm going to select my background, then go up to Effects, come down to Color Correction, and choose the Lumetri color suite. Now this is right out of Adobe Premiere, so if you're familiar with color correction in Premiere, this should be no problem at all. I'm going to go to Basic Correction, and I'm going to start with temperature. I might warm it up just a little bit since it's a desert scene. I might also desaturate it just a bit to kind of give it a washed out deserty feel. And I might pop the contrast up just a touch. All right. Now, I want to give this sort of a Michael Bay Transformers circa 2000 look. So one of the things Michael Bay always did was he cranked up his teal and orange values. Now we've got blue here, which is not far from teal, and we've got orange down here. So all we need to do is just tweak these a little bit. You can definitely try this on your project as well and see how you like it. I'm going to go down to Creative, and that's going to give me my shadow and highlight tint wheels. So all I'm going to do is grab the shadow tint and pull that down towards the teal color just a little bit. And you can see that starts to give my sky a little more of that teal color. It also kind of takes the green and makes it look a little unusual. If I click off and on, you can see what's happening. It's kind of muting the green a little. And then I'm going to grab the highlights and work those up towards the orange. And just by doing that, we get this sort of cinematic color grade that looks a little more washed out, a little more teal and orange. So I like that. Again, and that's something you can use on anything. Beyond that, let's go ahead and give it a little bit of vignetting. Not a ton. I don't want to see big black corners up here, but I do want to see a little bit of darkness in the corners. So to do that, I'm going to select the rectangle tool. But first, I have to click off of my background video clip, or else the rectangle tool will create a mask. So if I select the rectangle tool and I go to fill, you can set it to radial gradient like we have so many times before. Click OK, and then click on the actual gradient itself. And in this case, I've set the left to white, but I've also clicked on the opacity stop and dropped that down to 0. So essentially, my radial gradient will have a see-through center. On the right-hand side, I've got the black level set to black and the opacity stop at 100% up here. So if I come over here and double-click on this, it will drop that right on my screen and fill the screen. Now if I grab this handle and pull this out a little bit towards the edges, I really want this to be subtle, so I'm going to put it right about there. But again, I'm still not happy with this at all. This is not the look I'm going for. I want darker corners and a brighter center, but I don't want to see this black. So in order to sort of blend it in with what's already there, I'm going to go ahead and select this layer, go hit the toggle switches and modes button, set it back to modes, and then I'm going to change its mode to soft light. And there you go, and there you go. You see how that blends in with the existing colors? So our orange is a little darker down here and our blue's a little darker, but it doesn't actually feel like we just slapped a vignette on top of this. Okay, so let's do one more thing just to give this some visual interest, because we're definitely getting close to having something that looks pretty cool here. And if we look at it, the animation looks great, the color grading looks good, the footage looks cool. It just feels like it needs something else. So what we're going to do here is this. I have a folder full of effects that I'm going to make available to you guys. And they come from a site called Rampant.com. And so I'm going to come down to my video assets folder. This is a folder that I've built over many years, and this is almost all free things that I've downloaded from the internet. And one of my favorite is this Rampant 4K. That's the name of the company. And you can see they give away about 10 gigabytes worth of free overlays. So if we come down and look at one of these, let's check out something like smoke. If we hit the space bar to check it out, you can see that we've kind of got smoke emanating up from the bottom. That's really not going to work. Too thick, not really coming from where we want. But if we go to this bottom one, this is kind of slow and from the sides. And while it doesn't look good like this, I think I can manipulate it so that it works good in the project. So let's go ahead and drag this one into our project over here. Whoops. All right, so you noticed it accidentally went full screen there. In order to undo that, I just simply hit the tilde key, which is the key right under your escape key. Okay, so I'm thinking I want this to come in right around the same time as the text. It's called Cooked from the Heat, so this kind of makes sense. Let's go ahead and just drag it over. Now this is a 4K effect, so it's really big. So I might want to hit the S key and scale it down just a little bit, but quite honestly, I kind of want it to be big. I don't want it to be super obvious what we're seeing. So I'll keep the scale pretty big, and we'll just kind of look at that area right there. I'm going to move over its start point to just a little bit before the text comes in. And then, obviously the problem that you're seeing is that our background is still here. This black background is not blending with our existing scene. So let's use a blend mode. If we select the smoke layer and we hit normal, or we go to where it says normal, we can set this to screen, and that'll basically keep the white and knock out the black, which is a great way to composite this smoke into our scene. Now looking at this smoke, it's definitely not bad. I might drag it beneath my text. Probably doesn't make much of a difference because they're both white, but I definitely want it to be behind the text. I'm not going to make it 3D because I don't want the camera to affect this smoke. But what I am going to do is drop its opacity pretty considerably. Let's drop it down to about 40%. Okay, so now it's going to feel more like just a subtle sort of layer of motion inside our project here. And it's not super defined, it's not going to stand out. It's just going to add a little additional layer of motion. Now, in order to animate that in, I'll just add a fade in. So I'll put the playhead just a few seconds in. I'll click the T key for opacity. Now again, I'm going to kind of do this backwards. Right now it's at 40%, so I'll click the opacity stopwatch, and then I'll drag this back to the beginning of the clip, and I will drop its opacity down to 0. And let's take a look at what we've got here. It's going to need to play through to render real quick, but adding in that smoke, and again, I could probably even go a little bit lower. Now you'll notice at the end there, I need to trim this down because it's showing a little unwanted clip where my video clip ends. So we'll go ahead and just grab our work bar here and just drag this back a little bit, and then right click and choose Trim Comp to Work Area. There we go. Now we don't have those unwanted frames at the end. So looking at this smoke, like I said, it looks good. It's composited well, but still maybe a bit too visible. So I'm going to go ahead and just put the playhead back over that last playhead, that last keyframe. And I like to use my arrow keys to make sure that I'm right on top of that keyframe. And now I can drop this value down just to maybe like, I don't know, 30, 32. Again, I just don't want it to be obvious. And there we go. Now it's a little more subtle. So the last thing I have to do, or that I want to do, is throw some music on here. So let's go ahead and grab some music. Now, in my attempts to use the audio libraries on YouTube, all I find is that they send me to link after link, and despite following all the instructions, I still wasn't able to download the files. So I ended up using a YouTube downloader. I just Googled the words YouTube downloader and downloaded a song from the rights-free collection on YouTube. And that song is in my folder. So we'll grab it and drag it in. Bring this over here. So again, you can see this is copyright-free music. This is a full video clip though. So if I drag this down, there is actually a video element to this, which I don't want anybody to see. So I'm going to click T for opacity. Again, if I just to click on it, I'll show you. There's all that stuff. And I just want the audio part of it. So I'm going to select this layer. Go back to my comp view. There we go. I'm going to select this layer and just drop its opacity to 0. And then I'll hit the drop down. Close up transform, and I'm going to go down to audio and look at where it says waveform. And by doing that, now I can kind of see where the song sort of builds up. I can see something kind of happens right there. But let's go ahead and just give it a listen as it is. Okay, that works for me. No real need to move this around much. So if you're happy and I'm happy, let's go ahead and export this. We've added in our camera animation. We've used a little preset on our lower text here. We've done a few things to make our text look the way we want. Now, make sure you use a custom font for this. In my case, I'm using one called, what is this font called? It's called Bebas, B-E-B-A-S. It's kind of a Helvetica takeoff. So let's go ahead now and go over to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. And you can see what we want to do is we want to go to Output Module and make sure this is set to high quality. If it's not, go ahead and double click on it. Then come over to Format Options and you can choose the video codec. Now we want to use something high quality like ProRes. In the past, we've used animation, but the new Apple Silicone can't read it yet. So hopefully we'll get some support for that in the future. But right now, Apple ProRes is a decent codec to use. It's an Apple codec, so we know it'll work. Let's go ahead and click OK. And then we can click OK again. So we've set that to high quality, 422. It's defaulting to QuickTime, and that's fine. And then we'll go over to where it says output to, and where it says not yet specified. We'll double click on that, and we'll save it into the exports folder in our project folder. Now, if you haven't made an exports folder, just click this new folder button and make a folder and title it exports. You can see I've done this a few times. And click save, and then you can click render. Again, would have been smart to give it a title, but I can do that right there in the folder. So now if I come over to my video folder and to my cinematic titles, into my exports folder, there is my export. Let's give it a look. All right, looks great.